My children brought me birthday gifts, 3 nursing home brochures. They smiled and said, "It's time, Mom. We already picked your room." I nodded calmly. The next morning, my lawyer called them all in. When he read my new will out loud, my daughter collapsed and my son screamed, "You can't do this!" Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The air in my dining room was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and unease. It was my 68th birthday. Cynthia had insisted on hosting the dinner at my house, saying it was easier for me. She and Marcus arrived together, which was unusual. They brought a store-bought cake, the white frosting too sweet, and a single gift, boxed and ribboned, which they placed at the center of the table like a centerpiece. We ate first. The conversation was a series of reports. Cynthia talked about her recent promotion and the renovations on her sunroom. Marcus complained about his car payments. I nodded and asked appropriate questions, my mind noting the absence of any inquiry about my own life, my book club, my volunteer hours at the library. The clink of silverware against my good china was the only honest sound in the room. When the plates were cleared, Cynthia reached for the box. Her smile was a practiced curve of lipstick. "Now for your real present, Mom." Marcus shifted in his chair, his eyes on the tablecloth. I remember the weight of the box in my hands. It was too light to contain anything of substance. I untied the ribbon with careful fingers, lifted the lid, and parted the tissue paper. Inside were 3 glossy brochures. I lifted them out. Each one featured photographs of smiling, silver-haired strangers in spacious rooms or walking through manicured gardens. Sunset Haven, Golden Years Manor, the Arbor's Assisted Living. The paper was slick and expensive. Cynthia leaned forward, her voice adopting a tone I recognized from her corporate videos. "We've been thinking, Mom, really thinking about your future, your safety." "It's not safe, you living here all alone," Marcus added, finally looking at me. His expression was a mix of guilt and a strange eagerness. "These are the best facilities in the state," Cynthia continued, as if I hadn't spoken. She tapped the top brochure with a manicured finger. "We've already visited Sunset Haven. We put down a deposit. They have a room with a southern exposure. There's a whole activities calendar, bridge, water aerobics. You'll have a community." The words hung in the air. Put down a deposit. Already visited. This was not a suggestion. It was a settled fact presented to me as a gift. "You picked my room," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "It's for the best," Cynthia said. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was cool and brief. "We worry about you, the stairs. What if you fell? This way, you'll have help available day and night. It's what we all want." I looked at Marcus. He gave a stiff nod. "Cynthia's done all the research. It's really nice, Mom. You won't have to lift a finger." I placed the brochures back in the box. I aligned the edges neatly. My hands were steady, a fact I noted with a detached interest. Inside, a cold, solid weight was forming in my chest, hardening by the second. "This is quite a surprise," I said. "We wanted to take care of it for you," Cynthia said, her smile widening, relieved by my apparent calm. "You've done so much for us. Now it's our turn to take care of you. The paperwork is all straightforward. We can start the transition next week." I looked around my dining room, at the sideboard that held photos of my late husband, Charles, and of the children when they were small, at the shelves of books I had read and would read again, at the well-woven rug from a trip we took decades ago. Every object held a memory they were now ready to box up and put into storage. They saw a house. I saw the careful architecture of my life. "I appreciate the thought," I heard myself say. The sentence was automatic, a placeholder. "You've gone to a lot of trouble." Cynthia beamed, misinterpreting completely. "It was no trouble. We're just so happy to help you into this next chapter. It's time, Mom. Really." It is time, I thought. but not for what they imagined. I stood up and began to gather the dessert plates. "Well, thank you for the birthday dinner. And for the information. I'll need some time to look it over." "Of course," Cynthia said, standing as well. She and Marcus exchanged a glance of victory. They had done the difficult thing, and I had not made a scene. I had been reasonable. They had expected tears, perhaps arguments about independence. My calm acceptance was better than they had hoped. They left soon after, with brisk hugs and promises to call tomorrow to talk details. I stood at the door and watched their cars disappear down the quiet street. Then I closed the door and turned the deadbolt with a firm click. The house was silent. I walked back to the dining room. The brochures lay spilled from their box across the lace tablecloth, bright and garish against the white. I did not touch them. I stood there for a long time, listening to the old clock tick in the hallway. The humiliation was a slow burn. It was not in their decision. I could have understood concern. It was in the execution, the wrapped box, the birthday presentation, the rehearsed speeches, the deposit placed without my knowledge. They had discussed me, my life, my home, as if I were not a participant. They had made plans for my decline, anticipating it, maybe even welcoming it. I was an obstacle to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. Their relief was palpable because they thought the burden was nearly lifted. I cleared the table. I washed each dish by hand, the hot water scalding my skin, focusing on the simple physical task. When the kitchen was spotless, I poured a glass of water and walked to the living room. I did not sit. I stood at the large window looking out at my garden, now dark. The cold weight in my chest had crystallized into a plan. It was not a plan of anger, though anger was there. It was a plan of precision. They had used the language of care and family to enact a dispossession. I would use the language of law and legacy to enact a correction. I thought of Charles. He had been a man of quiet principle. He had built this life with me, brick by brick, book by book, lesson by lesson. He would not have recognized the avaricious strangers who sat at our table tonight. I finished the water. I placed the glass in the sink. Then I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, where an old rotary phone sat. I lifted the receiver. The dial made a heavy, satisfying click with each number I turned. I knew the number by heart. It rang twice before a familiar, measured voice answered. Thorne and Associates. "Robert," I said. My voice was clear, without a tremor. "It's Eleanor Vance. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. There's a matter of my will that requires an immediate change." The line was quiet for a moment after I spoke. Then Robert Thorne's voice returned, its professional cadence unchanged, but I heard the slight shift in tone. "Eleanor, of course. 9 o'clock suit you?" "9 is perfect," I said. "I'll have the documents prepared for review. Is there anything specific I should prioritize?" "Everything," I said. "A complete revision. I will explain tomorrow." I did not say goodbye, simply replaced the receiver in its cradle. The final click echoed in the silent room. The decision was now a concrete appointment in a ledger. There was no turning back, and I felt no desire to do so. I did not sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one Charles had favored, and watched the night pass. I did not dwell on the hurt. That was a luxury I could not afford. Instead, I planned. I cataloged assets. The house, paid for 20 years ago, the investments Robert had guided me toward after Charles's death, the savings from a lifetime of careful work. I thought of my children's faces at the table, Cynthia's smug compassion, Marcus's impatient guilt. They had seen these things as a promise, a countdown clock they had grown tired of watching. I would repurpose that legacy into a lesson. At dawn, I rose and made tea. The familiar ritual, boiling water, warming the pot, the steep and pour, grounded me. I took the cup to the kitchen window. The first light was gray, washing over my backyard garden. I had planted the azaleas myself. The quiet of the morning was not peaceful. It was charged, like the stillness before a verdict is read. I dressed with particular care. a simple, well-tailored navy dress. I chose my silver hoop earrings, a gift from Charles for our 25th anniversary. I needed to feel composed, armored in my own history. Robert Thorne's office was in a downtown building of granite and glass. His private room was as I remembered, shelves of leather-bound books, a large oak desk, a smell of paper and citrus polish. He stood as I entered, a tall man with silvering hair and eyes that missed nothing. He did not offer empty condolences. He gestured to a chair. "Eleanor, you look well." "I am," I said, seating myself, "and I am of sound mind. I imagine you'll need to verify that." "Standard procedure for a significant change." He nodded, making a note. "We can have a doctor come by the house discreetly. Now tell me what you require." I laid it out for him, clear, unemotional, precise. I wanted a new last will and testament. The previous one, which left the estate in equal shares to Cynthia and Marcus, was to be destroyed. In its place, I wanted a single primary beneficiary. "I wish to establish a scholarship fund," I said. "The Vance Legacy Scholarship for first-generation Black college students with a preference for those pursuing education or community service. The entirety of my estate, real property, financial assets, all of it, is to fund it." Robert's pen moved steadily across his pad. He did not look up. "And your children?" "They are to receive $1 each, a formal recognition, and they are to be present at the reading of the will as a condition of its execution. I want them in this room when you read it." Now he looked at me. His gaze was analytical, not judgmental. "That is a specific stipulation. May I ask the rationale?" "They presented me with nursing home brochures for my birthday. They have already placed a deposit. They believe I am a burden to be managed and an inheritance to be collected. I am correcting their misunderstanding." He absorbed this. A flicker in his eyes was the only sign of his opinion. "I see. The conditional attendance clause is unusual but legally enforceable. It ensures they cannot claim they were unaware. Are you prepared for their reaction?" "I am not responsible for their reaction," I said. "I am only responsible for my actions. I have been responsible for them my entire life. This is my final act of responsibility, to ensure my life's work serves a purpose that understands its value." He asked several technical questions about the fund's administration, trustees, investment strategies. I deferred to his expertise on the mechanics, but was firm on the intent. We worked for 2 hours. By the end, the structure was clear, the language ironclad. He read a draft of the key clause aloud, his voice dry and steady. "All the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, real and personal, of every kind and description and wherever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath to the Vance Legacy Scholarship Fund, a charitable trust to be established herein." It was done. I signed the preliminary documents. The doctor would visit me that afternoon for the competency assessment. When I returned home, the message light on my machine was blinking. I pressed play. Cynthia's voice, bright and brisk. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Wanted to see how you're feeling after last night. Give me a call when you get a chance. We need to pick a date for the movers." Beep. Marcus, his voice gruff. "Yeah, Mom, it's me. Cynthia said you took it pretty well." "That's good. Listen, let me know if you need help going through stuff in the garage. I could use that old drill if you're just going to toss it." Beep. I erased both messages. Their voices, filled with the busy work of my dismantling, confirmed the absolute rightness of my morning's work. They were already dividing the spoils of a war they thought they'd won without a fight. That evening, after the doctor, a polite older woman who asked me about current events and had me perform a series of simple tasks, had left with her notarized form affirming my lucidity, I sat at my desk. I wrote a list of personal items. My mother's pearl necklace for my friend Alma from the library, Charles's pocket watch for the young man who shoveled my walk every winter, my set of Shakespeare to the community center. These were my true bequests, tokens of connection. The phone rang again. I let it. I listened to Cynthia's voice, slightly sharper now, asking me to please call her back. I pictured her in her perfect kitchen, her irritation growing because I was not adhering to the schedule of my own obsolescence. I felt a calm so deep it was almost foreign. The sadness was there, a cold, thin layer beneath everything, but it was contained. It was no longer a disabling grief. It was a fuel. They had wanted to make me passive, a patient to be processed. Instead, they had made me a strategist. They had mistaken my dignity for docility. As night fell again, I did not look at the brochures still on the dining table. I walked past them. I went to my closet and took out a dress I had not worn in years, a beautiful kente cloth print, a gift from the faculty when I retired. I laid it across a chair, ready for tomorrow. It was not a dress for a woman being led to her quiet end. It was the dress of a principal, of a matriarch, of a woman who was about to hold court. Robert would messenger the formal letters to Cynthia and Marcus in the morning, summoning them to his office. My part, for now, was complete. I had set the mechanism in motion. All that was left was to witness its execution. The kente cloth dress hung on the closet door, a silent sentinel. The morning after my meeting with Robert, I performed my normal routine with deliberate focus. I watered the plants. I read the newspaper. I ate toast. The domestic rhythm was a counterpoint to the machinery I had set in motion. At precisely 10 o'clock, a uniformed courier arrived at my door. I signed for a single, thick envelope. Inside was a copy of the letter Robert had sent to Cynthia, and another for Marcus. I read them once, verifying the language. They were perfect. You are hereby requested to attend a meeting at the offices of Thorne and Associates, Suite 1100, at 3 p.m. tomorrow, regarding a matter of urgent familial importance pertaining to the estate of Eleanor Vance. Your attendance is required. It was formal, cold, and gave no room for refusal. I placed the copies in my desk drawer and locked it. Then I waited. I did not have to wait long. My phone rang at 11:15. Cynthia's number flashed on the caller ID. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello, Cynthia. Mom, I just got the most bizarre letter from Mr. Thorne. Her voice was a mix of annoyance and curiosity. It's about some urgent familial matter. Do you know what this is about? I kept my tone neutral. Robert handles my legal affairs. I assume he has something to discuss. But why summon us both? And why the formal language? It's not like him. I could hear the faint tap of her keyboard in the background. She was multitasking, already relegating this to a minor agenda item. I couldn't say. He requested my presence as well. A pause. I could almost see her mind working, sorting through possibilities. Then her voice smoothed out, adopting a tone of sudden, patronizing understanding. Oh, I think I know. It must be about the paperwork for Sunset Haven. Maybe there's a lien or something on the house he needs to clear before the sale, or a power of attorney form he wants us all to sign. That makes sense. That could be it, I said, neither confirming nor denying. Well, it's a bit dramatic, but fine. I'll rearrange my afternoon. Marcus got one too. I'll call him and let him know it's probably just a formality. She sounded relieved, having filed the unknown into a known, manageable category. This is good, Mom. It means things are moving forward. Yes, I agreed. Things are certainly moving forward. We ended the call. An hour later, my phone rang again. Marcus. Hey, Ma. His voice was louder, as if he were in his car. Sin called. She said you got a lawyer letter, too, about the old folks' home stuff? I received a notice to attend a meeting, yes. Geez, could have just called. Lawyers. Always got to make a production. Anyway, I'll be there. Can't be long, though. I've got a thing later. He meant a poker game. I knew his schedule. I'm sure Robert will be efficient, I said. Yeah, whatever. Look, while we're all together, you want to make a list of the big furniture you're taking? Sin says the room only fits so much. We should figure out what to do with the rest. The rest, my life, condensed to a verb. We can discuss it tomorrow, I said. All right, see you then. The line went dead. I placed the phone down. Their reactions were precisely as I had calculated. Confusion quickly overridden by arrogant assumption. They had constructed a narrative where they were the benevolent administrators and I was the compliant client. The lawyer's summons was just another step in their process. They did not consider that they might be the subjects of the proceeding, not its architects. That afternoon, I went to the salon. I had my hair styled, the silver waves coiled into an elegant chignon. It was not vanity, it was uniform. I was preparing for a kind of battle, and appearance is part of the armor. The woman in the mirror looked regal, composed. She looked like a woman who held secrets. On my way home, I stopped at the florist and bought a single white orchid. I placed it in a crystal vase on the sideboard next to Charles's photograph. It was a gesture of calm, a touch of life and beauty in the stillness. I was creating the stage for my own final act in this house. I prepared a simple dinner for myself. As I ate, I considered their positions. Cynthia would be irritated by the imposition on her schedule, but smugly confident, already mentally spending what she saw as her due. Marcus would be impatient, viewing the meeting as a pointless delay between him and his windfall. They would arrive together, a united front. They would not have consulted each other about any other possibility, because no other possibility existed in their world. The depth of their error was almost astronomical. They had assessed my value solely in terms of property and liability. They had forgotten, or never truly learned, that I was a woman who had built a career on foresight, who had managed a household budget through lean times, who had navigated the loss of a spouse with quiet fortitude. They saw the container, the house, the body, and dismissed the contents, the mind, the will. As dusk settled, I took the nursing home brochures from the dining table. I did not tear them up. I placed them neatly in the recycling bin. They were no longer a threat, merely trash to be disposed of. I slept that night, a deep, untroubled sleep. My conscience was clear. I had given them every opportunity for decades to be different people. Their choices at my birthday dinner were merely the final, definitive data points in a long study. My response was not an act of spite, but of conclusive evaluation. When I awoke, the morning of the meeting was bright and sharp. I dressed with slow ceremony. The kente cloth dress felt both familiar and powerful, its vibrant patterns a stark contrast to the somber legal setting we would inhabit. I looked at myself one last time in the hall mirror. Eleanor Vance, retired principal, Eleanor Vance, widow, Eleanor Vance, mother, and today Eleanor Vance, testator, the one who speaks last and whose words become binding law. I left the house early. I wanted to be in that wood-paneled room before them. I wanted to be seated, settled, composed. I wanted them to walk in and find me already in place, a fixture of the landscape they had come to claim, only to discover the landscape had a will of its own. Robert's summons had been issued and accepted. The players were en route to the arena. All that remained was the reading of the new rules. The elevator doors opened onto the 11th floor with a soft chime. The reception area of Thorne and Associates was a study in quiet authority. Deep Persian rugs, dark wood paneling, leather chairs. The air smelled of lemon polish and old paper. A young man in a suit at the reception desk looked up and smiled in recognition. Mrs. Vance. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you. Right this way." He led me down a hushed corridor. Robert was standing in the doorway of a conference room, not his personal office. It was a larger space, meant for multiple parties. A long, polished table dominated the room, surrounded by heavy chairs. One wall was lined with legal volumes. A single window offered a view of the city's granite skyline. "Eleanor," Robert said, his voice low, "you look formidable." "That is the intention," I said, entering. I chose the chair at the far end of the table with my back to the window. It positioned me as the head of the table, the natural focal point. Robert took the seat to my immediate right, a stack of documents and a single sealed envelope in front of him. I placed my purse on the floor beside me and folded my hands on the table. The vibrant geometric patterns of my dress were a shock of color against the somber browns and tans of the room. I was a statement they could not ignore. We did not speak. We waited. Robert checked his watch once. At 2 minutes to 3, I heard voices in the corridor, Cynthia's clipped tones, Marcus's deeper rumble. They were arguing about parking. The door opened. The receptionist announced them. "Mr. Thorne, your guests." Cynthia entered first. She wore a taupe pantsuit, her hair perfect. She was already speaking. "Robert, this really was excessively formal. We could have handled this over." Her words trailed off as her eyes adjusted to the dim light and landed on me. She stopped. Marcus, following behind, nearly bumped into her. He was in a polo shirt and khakis, underdressed and irritated. He saw me and his expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "Mom?" Cynthia said. "What are you doing here?" Her question was automatic, but the edge in her voice revealed the first prickle of disquiet. I was not supposed to be here as an equal participant. I was supposed to be the subject of discussion. "I was summoned, same as you," I said. My voice was calm, even. "Please sit." Robert stood briefly, a gesture of professional courtesy. "Cynthia, Marcus, thank you for coming on short notice. Please have a seat." They moved hesitantly to the chairs opposite us, leaving the space at the other head of the table empty. They sat down together, a united but suddenly uncertain front. Cynthia's eyes darted from my face to Robert's to the sealed envelope. Her confident narrative was fraying. "So," Marcus said, shifting in the too-firm chair, "what's this about? Cynthia said it's probably house paperwork for the move." Robert steepled his fingers. "We are here today for the formal reading of your mother's last will and testament." A beat of silence. Cynthia let out a small, forced laugh. "Her will? But that's... We already know what's in her will. Everything comes to Marcus and me. Is there a tax issue? A problem with the deed?" She was scrambling, trying to fit this new fact into her old framework. "There is a new will," Robert stated. "Executed yesterday. It revokes all prior wills and codicils. Mrs. Vance has asked that I read it to you both in person, as your attendance today is a condition of its proper execution." The words, "new will," hung in the air. I watched their faces. Cynthia's smile froze, then melted away. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. Marcus's confusion deepened into a scowl. "A new will?" Cynthia repeated. Her gaze locked onto me, sharp and searching. "Mom, what is this? What's going on?" I met her look without blinking. "You are here to listen, Cynthia. Robert will explain." She flushed, a red stain rising on her neck. Being told to listen in that tone, in this setting, was a shock to her system. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the polished wood. "Is this about the nursing home? Because if you're trying to change things around to make it harder, that's just silly. We're doing what's best for you." "Your mother's decisions regarding her estate are her own," Robert interjected, his voice a wall of cool professionalism. "My role is to administer her instructions. Shall we begin?" He didn't wait for an answer. He picked up the sealed envelope, slid it open with a silver letter opener, and extracted several thick pages. The sound of the paper unfolding was loud in the quiet room. He cleared his throat. Cynthia and Marcus were utterly still now. The casual arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning, watchful tension. The setting had done its work. The wood paneling, the weight of the table, the impenetrable calm of the lawyer, and my own silent, regal presence. It all communicated that this was not a family chat. This was a tribunal. Cynthia's hand went to her throat. Marcus's jaw was tight. They were no longer the managers of my life. They were recipients of a verdict, and they had just realized they didn't know what the charges were. Robert began to read. "Last will and testament of Eleanor Jean Vance. I, Eleanor Jean Vance, a resident of the city of Somerset, being of sound and disposing mind and memory, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking all prior wills and codicils made by me." His voice was a dry, steady recitation. I did not look at my children. I kept my eyes on Robert, my posture straight, my hands still folded. But in my periphery, I saw Cynthia's rigid posture, Marcus's clenched fist on the table. The room, for all its solidity, seemed to tilt slightly, the axis of their world shifting under them with every word. They had walked in, expecting to discuss the logistics of my disappearance. Now they were waiting to hear the terms of their own inheritance. The difference between those two things was about to become devastatingly clear. Robert's voice filled the quiet room, a dry river of legal terminology. Do hereby make, publish, and declare. I let the words flow over me. I had reviewed the document. I knew its structure. This was the preamble establishing my mental competence and revoking all previous instructions. It was the foundation. I watched my children. Cynthia's initial shock had solidified into a brittle attentiveness. She was a strategist like me, but her strategy had always been one of acquisition, not preservation. Her eyes flickered, following Robert's words as if she could find a loophole in the cadence itself. Marcus was less patient. He drummed his fingers once on the table, then caught Cynthia's sharp glance and stopped. He leaned back, arms crossed, a portrait of strained nonchalance. He wanted the bottom line. Robert continued, moving past the formalities into the first article. Article 1, Payment of Debts and Expenses. I direct my executor to pay all my just debts, funeral expenses, and the costs of administering my estate. Marcus let out a soft, impatient sigh. This was boilerplate. This was not why they were here. Article 2, Specific Bequests. Robert read, his tone unchanged. Cynthia leaned forward slightly. This was the beginning of the distribution. This was what mattered. I give and bequeath my mother's double-strand pearl necklace to my dear friend Alma Higgins. Robert's voice was clear and neutral, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of Cynthia's mouth. Those pearls. She'd admired them once, years ago, calling them vintage. I had told her they were my mother's, not mine to give away yet. Now they were Alma's. I give and bequeath the gold pocket watch belonging to my late husband, Charles Vance, to Michael Dobbs, in recognition of his kind and faithful service. Marcus's brow furrowed. "Who's Michael Dobbs?" he muttered to Cynthia. "The kid who shovels her walk," she whispered back, her voice tight. "I give and bequeath my complete set of the Oxford Shakespeare in 20 volumes to the Somerset Community Center for use in their adult literacy program. A book set." Cynthia's posture stiffened. These were not trivial items. The pearls were valuable. The watch was gold. The books were a first edition set, a collector's item. They were meaningful, and they were leaving the family. Robert read on. A small watercolor painting to a former colleague. My collection of recorded classical music albums to the local library. A donation of $5,000 to the Historical Society. Each bequest was specific, considered, and entirely devoid of the names Cynthia or Marcus Vance. The air in the room grew thicker. This was not a will. This was an erasure. With each sentence, Robert was methodically dismantling their expectations. These were not the actions of a confused woman being led to a nursing home. These were the deliberate, clear-minded dispositions of a woman in full command of her history and her property. Cynthia's cheeks were now flushed with a high, sharp color. Her hands were clasped so tightly on the table that her knuckles were white. Marcus had abandoned his slouch. He was sitting forward, his confusion rapidly boiling into anger. He kept looking at me, but I remained focused on Robert, my expression serene, my hands relaxed. "Is this a joke?" Marcus finally burst out, unable to contain himself any longer. Robert paused and looked over the top of his reading glasses. "This is a legal document, Marcus. Please refrain from interruptions." "But she's giving away all the good stuff. To strangers. What about the house? What about the money?" His voice was too loud for the confined space. "The provisions of the will be read in their entirety," Robert said, his tone allowing no argument. "You will have your answers if you allow me to continue." Cynthia placed a restraining hand on Marcus's arm. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. "Let him finish," she hissed. She was trying to recalibrate, to understand the scope of the damage. These specific bequests were painful, but perhaps they were just sentimental gestures. The core of the estate, the house, the investments that would still be theirs. It had to be. This was just their mother's eccentricity, a final petty rebellion for being forced into Sunset Haven. That was the new narrative she was constructing, and I could see her clinging to it. Robert returned to the document. "I give and bequeath the sum of $10,000 to the Somerset Public Library for the maintenance of the children's reading garden." Another cut, not a vast sum but a directed one, a statement of where I valued community. He read two more minor bequests, a lamp to a neighbor, a donation to my alma mater's scholarship fund. With each one, the tension coiled tighter in the room. The preliminary gifts were done. We had reached the end of Article 2. Robert turned the page. The paper made a crisp sound. He took a slow breath. Article 3. Disposition of residuary estate. This was it. This was the clause that dealt with everything that remained after debts and specific gifts, the entirety of the core estate. Cynthia held her breath. Marcus leaned so far forward he was almost out of his chair. Robert read, his voice gaining a slight, deliberate weight. "All the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, real and personal, of every kind and description and wherever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath." He paused, a millisecond for effect, or perhaps just to ensure perfect clarity. In that silence, I saw the naked, desperate hope on my children's faces. It was the last time I would see it. He finished the sentence. "To the Vance Legacy Scholarship Fund, a charitable trust to be established for the exclusive purpose of providing financial assistance to first-generation Black college students within the state, with a preference for those pursuing studies in education or community service." The words fell into the silence with the finality of a vault door closing. For 3 full seconds, nothing moved. Cynthia stared at Robert, her face utterly blank, as if the words were in a language she could not parse. Marcus blinked, his head cocked to one side like a confused dog. Then Cynthia's breath left her in a short, sharp exhale. "What?" Robert continued, methodically outlining the administrative details, the appointment of trustees, the investment guidelines. But the core fact was now a stone in the room. The house, the stocks, the bonds, the savings, everything that was not a specific trinket given away in Article 2 was gone. It was now a fund, a concept, a legacy for strangers, or for— "Wait," Marcus said, his voice low and ragged. "Wait, go back. What did you just say?" Robert paused and looked at him. "The residuary estate establishes the Vance Legacy Scholarship Fund." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "No, that can't be right. What about us? Where's our part?" Robert turned a page. Article 4. Bequests to Cynthia Vance and Marcus Vance. He read, his voice devoid of inflection. "I give and bequeath to my daughter, Cynthia Marie Vance, the sum of $1. I give and bequeath to my son, Marcus Charles Vance, the sum of $1. The $1 recognition, a legal formality that underscored the disinheritance. It was not an oversight. It was a monument to their exclusion. Cynthia made a sound, a tiny choked gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, swung from Robert to me. "Mom?" The word was a whisper, stripped of all its former condescension. It was the voice of a child who has just been told a terrible, inexplicable truth. I met her gaze. I did not speak. My face was a calm mask. Marcus exploded. He slammed both palms flat on the table, the impact like a gunshot in the quiet room. "No!" he roared. "You can't do this! That's our money, that's my house. You can't just give it away." Spittle flew from his lips. His face was mottled red with fury. Robert remained impassive. "The testator is of sound mind and has every legal right to dispose of her property as she sees fit. The will is valid, executed yesterday with all proper formalities, including a contemporaneous assessment of mental competency by an independent physician. A copy of that affidavit is attached." "She's lost her mind," Marcus screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This proves it. Giving everything to a bunch of... to strangers. This is insanity. We'll contest this. We'll have you declared incompetent." "You are welcome to try," Robert said, his voice cool. "You will fail. The documentation is impeccable. The burden of proof will be on you, and you will find no doctor, no witness to support your claim. The process will be lengthy, public, and expensive, and you will lose." Cynthia was not listening to the legal rebuttal. She was staring only at me, the reality sinking in, layer by horrific layer. Her plans, her calculations, her imagined future of financial ease and social positioning, it was all vanishing before her eyes. The Southern Exposure Room at Sunset Haven was now a cruel joke. They had placed a deposit for a transition that would leave them with nothing. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible. Then her voice strengthened, cracking with a sudden venomous hurt. "Why would you do this to us, to your own children, after everything we've done for you?" That was my cue. They had heard the law. Now they would hear the reason. I unfolded my hands and placed them on the table. I did not raise my voice. "You presented me with brochures for my burial," I said. My tone was even, conversational. "You wrapped them as a gift. You had selected my room. You had placed a deposit. You discussed my things, my home, my life, as if I were already gone. You saw me as a burden to be relocated and an account to be emptied. It was for your own good," Cynthia cried, her composure shattering into tears of rage and loss. "We were worried about you." "You were worried about your inheritance," I corrected. "You were impatient for it. You thought the waiting was over. You were mistaken. The only thing that is over is your claim on a life you valued only for its material worth." Marcus was still heaving with anger, but a new emotion was entering his eyes, a dawning, impotent panic. The money he counted on to fix his debts, the house he thought he could sell, it was smoke. "You bitch," he seethed. "You vindictive old bitch." Robert stood up, his full height imposing. "You will not speak to my client in that manner. This meeting is to inform you of the contents of the will. That purpose has been served." But the will was not just a document. It was a verdict. And in that wood-paneled room, the sentence had been delivered. The scholarship fund was not merely a charity. It was the instrument of their punishment. Every dollar that would send a young person to college was a dollar they would never see. Their greed had financed their own disinheritance. Cynthia's body seemed to deflate. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, trembling shock. She looked from the damning papers in Robert's hands to my impassive face, and I saw the exact moment she understood there was no appeal, no loophole, no maternal softness to exploit. She had played her hand, and I had played a better one. The principal clause had been read. The trust was established. Their future had been rewritten, and in the new edition they were footnotes. The silence after my last words was total. Cynthia stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving her skin a sickly gray. She looked like a figure in a wax museum, a perfect imitation of my daughter that had suddenly melted. Then her eyes rolled back in her head. Her body did not crumple dramatically. It simply slid, a slow, boneless descent from the chair. She made no sound. Her shoulder hit the edge of the table, then she landed on the Persian rug with a soft thud, her limbs splayed at awkward angles. "Cynthia!" Marcus shouted, lurching from his chair. He knelt beside her, patting her cheek. "Cyn, wake up!" Robert Thorne did not move from his position. He watched, his expression one of detached professional observation. "She has fainted," he stated. "The stress. It is not uncommon." Marcus glared up at him, then at me, his fury reignited by this new crisis. "Look what you've done! You've killed her!" "She is breathing," Robert said calmly. "Her pulse is strong. She will regain consciousness momentarily." I remained seated. I looked at my daughter's prone form on the floor. I felt a distant clinical pity, the kind one might feel for a stranger in medical distress. But I did not move to help. This was a consequence, not my responsibility. Marcus fumbled with Cynthia's collar, his hands clumsy. A low moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. As she began to stir, Marcus's concern for her was swiftly overpowered by his returning rage. He stood up, leaving her dazed on the carpet, and turned his full focus on me. "You think this is over?" he snarled. His voice was thick, choked with emotion. "You think you can just sign a paper and steal what's ours? I'll fight this. I'll take you to court and I'll drag your name through the mud. I'll tell everyone you're a senile, vindictive old woman who's lost her mind." Robert spoke before I could. "As I stated, you are free to contest. You will need to file a petition alleging undue influence or lack of testamentary capacity. You will need evidence. You have none. The attending physician's affidavit is comprehensive. I have 2 associates who witnessed the signing and can attest to Mrs. Vance's clarity. Your case will be dismissed, and you will be liable for all legal fees, including those incurred by the estate. You're in on it." Marcus pointed a shaking finger at Robert. "You poisoned her against us. You're after the money yourself." Robert's gaze was icy. "That is a defamatory accusation, and I advise you to retract it. My fees are fixed and have already been paid. The trust is administered by a separate board. My involvement ends with the execution of the will. Your conspiracy theories have no basis in fact." Cynthia was pushing herself up on one elbow. She blinked, disoriented, her hand going to the side of her head where it had connected with the table. Her eyes found me, and the memory flooded back. The shock was gone, replaced by a raw, wounded hatred. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "Your own flesh and blood. We're your children." "You ceased to act like my children when you decided to dispose of me," I said, my voice still level. "You made a financial calculation. I have simply provided the correct sum." Marcus let out a roar of frustration. He kicked the leg of the heavy conference table. It did not budge. The impotence of the gesture seemed to enrage him further. "That house is half mine. Dad would have wanted me to have it." "Your father," I said, allowing a sliver of ice into my tone, "would have been ashamed of you both. He built that house with his hands and his integrity. You see it as a cash transaction. You have no idea what he wanted." This struck a nerve. Marcus's bluster faltered for a second. Cynthia, still on the floor, began to cry. They were not gentle tears, but harsh, ugly sobs of utter loss. She was not crying for me or for our broken relationship. She was crying for the future she had counted on, the future that had just been erased. Her body shook with the force of it. The scene was grotesque. My son, red-faced and sputtering with incoherent rage. My daughter, weeping on an expensive rug in a lawyer's office. The dignified setting made their collapse seem all the more complete and sordid. Robert allowed the spectacle to continue for a minute. Then he said, "I think it is time for you both to leave. You have been informed of the contents of the will. Copies will be mailed to you. If you wish to pursue legal action, you will need to retain your own counsel." He moved to the door and opened it. The message was clear. Marcus seemed to deflate. The fight drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow, bewildered man. He looked from Robert to me to Cynthia sobbing on the floor. He had no play left. He bent down and with rough hands hauled Cynthia to her feet. She was unsteady, her weight leaning into him, her face buried in his shoulder, her cries muffled by his shirt. He did not look at me again. He half-carried, half-walked her toward the open door. As they passed the threshold, Cynthia lifted her head. Her mascara was streaked in black trails down her cheeks. Her eyes, red-rimmed and full of a venom I had never seen before, locked onto mine. "I hate you," she mouthed, the words silent but perfectly clear. Then they were gone. Robert closed the door softly behind them. The room was suddenly profoundly quiet. The only evidence of their presence was Cynthia's abandoned chair, pushed back at an angle, and the faint sound of her weeping fading down the hall. I took a slow, deep breath. I had anticipated their anger. I had not anticipated the fainting, the utter physical collapse of Cynthia's pride. It was more satisfying than I had allowed myself to imagine. The raw, unfiltered consequence of their greed was now a matter of record, witnessed by an officer of the court. Robert returned to his seat. He did not comment on their exit. He carefully gathered the pages of the will, aligning their edges. "The conditional attendance clause has been satisfied," he said, his voice returning to its businesslike tone. "The will is now fully operative." I nodded. The first and most violent reaction was over. My victory was now a legal fact, but my work in this room was not yet done. I had one more thing to say. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing away the sound of my daughter's weeping. Robert returned to his seat, the will now a settled fact between us on the polished table. The air still vibrated with their outrage, but the room was mine again. I looked at Robert. He waited. He knew I was not finished. "They will tell themselves a story," I said, my voice breaking the quiet. "They will say I am cruel, that I am spiteful. That age has made me irrational." Robert nodded once, a neutral gesture. "I want you to understand the story," I continued. "Not for your files, but so you know the will was not an act of emotion. It was an act of accounting." I shifted in my chair, not out of nerves, but to settle more firmly into the truth I was about to articulate. For years, I made allowances. I told myself their distance was busy lives. Their lack of curiosity about my days was a generational difference. I paid for Cynthia's graduate school. I bailed Marcus out of 2 failed business ventures. I considered it an investment in their stability, their happiness. I was their mother. It was my role. I paused, recalling the slow erosion. The shift was gradual. Conversations became inquiries about the house's value, property taxes, the cost of upkeep. They stopped asking how I was and started suggesting how things could be easier. A condo, a smaller place. Their concern was a thin veneer over a calculation. I saw it, but I chose to ignore it. A parent's hope is a powerful blindfold. Robert listened, his hands resting on the table, his expression one of professional attention. "The birthday dinner removed the blindfold," I said, my tone flattening. "The wrapped box, the brochures, the deposit, it was not a discussion, it was a presentation. They had assessed me, diagnosed me as a problem, and presented their solution. In that moment, I was not their mother. I was a logistical and financial obstacle they had jointly decided to remove." I could still see the glossy brochures on my lace tablecloth. The image was etched into my mind, clearer than any family photo. Their action was a clear statement of value. They valued the asset, the house, the money, and saw me as the deteriorating lock on the safe. Their inheritance was being inconveniently delayed by my continued existence and independence. They sought to expedite the process. I leaned forward slightly. My response is also a statement of value. I have valued my autonomy, my legacy, and my community for 68 years. They demonstrated they do not share those values. Therefore, leaving my estate to them would be a negation of my own life's principles. It would reward a worldview I find disrespectful and small. Robert spoke quietly. The scholarship fund. Yes, I said. Education was my life's work. It is the engine of dignity. Charles and I believed that. The fund takes the assets they saw as a cash payout and transforms them into opportunity. It honors the true wealth Charles and I built, not in bank statements, but in minds. It will help young people who understand the value of an opportunity because they have never had one handed to them. That is a fitting legacy. My children, who had every opportunity handed to them, have shown they understand only the handout, not the opportunity. I sat back. The explanation was complete. It was logical, derived from observable evidence and a consistent moral framework. It was the lesson plan I had spent a lifetime qualifying to write. They will not see it that way, Robert observed. I know, I said. They will see only the loss of the thing they felt entitled to. That is the point of the lesson. You cannot teach someone who does not recognize the subject. I am not teaching them about generosity or family. I am teaching them about consequences. They attempted to force a consequence on me, loss of home, liberty, legacy. I have simply demonstrated how consequences truly function. They are now experiencing the one they attempted to engineer for me. A long silence stretched between us. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, catching dust motes in the air. It is a severe lesson, Robert said finally. It was a severe betrayal, I replied, presented with a bow. One must match the severity of the offense with the clarity of the response. Half measures are confused as weakness. This, I gestured to the will, is not weak. It is definitive. There is no room for negotiation, for guilt, for future manipulations. The door is closed. They are free to live the lives they have built for themselves without the crutch of my labor. That is the final gift I can give them, the necessity of their own self-reliance. I saw the understanding in Robert's eyes. He was a man of logic and law. He appreciated the structural integrity of my decision. It was not a messy, emotional act. It was a deliberate, ethical, and legal restructuring of a broken contract. "Is there anything else you require today, Eleanor?" he asked, the question marking the end of the central business. "One thing," I said, "the house. I want it listed for sale immediately." I have already chosen my next residence. I do not wish to spend another night surrounded by their ghosts and my own disappointment. The proceeds, of course, will flow into the trust. "I will contact the realtor today," he said, making a note. I stood up. My body felt light, unburdened. The cold weight that had formed in my chest on my birthday was gone, transformed into the solid legal architecture of the Vance Legacy Scholarship Fund. The anger had been processed into purpose. The sadness was compartmentalized, a private artifact to be visited later, on my own terms. I gathered my purse. I had said what I needed to say. The explanation was for my own records and for Robert's understanding. Cynthia and Marcus had received their explanation in the form of a legal document. They could read it as often as they liked. The why was embedded in the what. I had no more words for them. I left Robert Thorne's office and did not look back. The city outside seemed brighter, the air sharper. I took a taxi home, a small luxury I rarely allowed myself. The driver made no conversation, and I appreciated the silence. The house awaited me, unchanged. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was now a property, an asset in transit. I went directly to the small desk in the living room and retrieved the contact information I had collected weeks earlier, before the birthday dinner, when the first vague hints from Cynthia had prompted me to research my own options. I dialed the number for the Cedars, an active living community on the south side of the city. A pleasant woman named Lorraine answered. I gave her my name. "We spoke 3 weeks ago about the available one-bedroom apartment with a garden view," I said. "Of course, Mrs. Vance." I remember. Are you calling to schedule a tour? No, I said. I am calling to accept it. I would like to move in 2 weeks from today. Please email the lease agreement to my lawyer, Robert Thorne. He will handle the details and the deposit. There was a brief pause on the line. 2 weeks? That is quite quick. We do require background checks and... Mr. Thorne will expedite everything. The apartment is still available? Yes, it is. Then consider it leased. I will see you in 2 weeks. I gave her Robert's contact information and ended the call. The process took less than 3 minutes. I had chosen the Cedars after visiting 5 places. It was not a nursing home. It was an apartment building for people over 65, with no medical staff on site, only a concierge and a calendar of optional activities. It had wide doorways and a ramp, but it was not a facility. It was a choice. Next, I called the realtor Robert had recommended. I told her the house was to be listed immediately, fully furnished, with a few personal exceptions. I wanted a quick sale. I gave her a key code to the lockbox and told her I would be packing and would prefer to be absent for showings. Then I began. I did not pack my life. I packed my future. I took 2 suitcases of clothing. I selected a single crate of books. My favorites, a few volumes of poetry, a biography of Mary McLeod Bethune. I packed a box of kitchen items, my good knife, the teapot Charles gave me, 2 place settings of my china. I packed my photographs, but only a handful. Charles and me on our wedding day, my parents, a picture of the children when they were small and smiling without calculation. I left the rest in their frames on the walls for the new owners to discard. The rest was inventory. Furniture, linens, dishes, the detritus of decades. I called a reputable estate sale company and scheduled them for the following weekend. The proceeds, after their fee, would be added to the house sale money flowing into the trust. I felt no sentimental pang as I tagged items with sticky notes. A chair is a chair, a sofa is a sofa. Their utility to me was ending. My children called. The phone rang incessantly for 2 days. Cynthia's calls shifted from tearful pleading to furious diatribes, then to cold, legalistic threats. Marcus left rambling, angry voicemails that trailed off into incoherent muttering. I listened to the first few seconds of each to confirm the caller, then deleted them. I had nothing more to say to them, and listening to their pain was not my responsibility. They had made their position clear. I had made mine clearer. On the 3rd day, Cynthia appeared at the door. I saw her through the window, standing on the porch, her face set in hard lines. I did not answer. She rang the bell 7 times, then began knocking. The sound was sharp and percussive against the wood. "Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk about this. You can't just shut us out." Her voice was shrill. I remained in the living room, continuing to wrap a vase in newspaper. The knocking persisted for several minutes, then stopped. I heard her car door slam and the engine roar away. The house was quiet again. I placed the wrapped vase in a box marked "Sale." The realtor held an open house. I spent that day at the library, then had lunch with my friend Alma. I told her I was moving, simplifying. I did not tell her the details. She was perceptive enough not to press, simply squeezing my hand and saying she looked forward to visiting my new place. When I returned, the realtor called. There were 3 strong offers, one at full asking price. I took it. The closing was set for 30 days out. It was happening with a swift mechanical efficiency that soothed me. During my final week in the house, I slept in the guest room. My own bedroom felt like a museum exhibit. I took long walks in the evenings, saying a silent, unemotional goodbye to the streets, the trees, the neighbor, who always waved from his porch. On the morning of the move, 2 polite young men from a moving company arrived. They loaded my few selected boxes and the 2 suitcases into a small van. Everything else remained for the estate sale. I did a final walkthrough. The rooms echoed. They were just rooms again, empty of the meaning I had given them. I took one last item from the mantel, the photograph of Charles. I placed it in my handbag. Then I walked out, locking the door behind me for the last time. I dropped the keys through the realtor's mail slot. The drive to the Cedars was 20 minutes. Lorraine was waiting for me in the bright, airy lobby. She handed me 2 new keys. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance." My apartment was on the 2nd floor. It was clean, modern, and filled with light. The garden view was of a small, tidy courtyard with benches and flowering shrubs. The movers brought my boxes in and placed them in the center of the living room. I thanked them and closed the door. The silence was different here. It was not the heavy silence of a finished history. It was the light, empty silence of a beginning. I opened the largest box, took out my teapot, and went to the kitchen to fill it with water. I had a home. It was of my own choosing. The battle was over, and I was now inhabiting the peace I had won. The whistle of the kettle broke the morning quiet. I rose from my chair and went to the kitchenette. The movement was familiar, the routine an anchor. I poured the boiling water over the tea leaves in my pot, the one from the old house. The scent of bergamot bloomed in the steam. I carried the pot and a single cup to the small table by the window. 1 month had passed since I moved into this apartment. The boxes were unpacked, the books arranged on shelves I had installed myself. The photograph of Charles sat on the side table beside my reading chair. The space was mine, configured to my habits, with no accommodation for guests who would not come. It was sufficient. Sunlight fell in a warm rectangle across the table. I poured my tea and looked out at the courtyard garden below. An older man I had met in the elevator, Mr. Henderson, was pruning rose bushes. A woman walked a small, tidy dog along the path. There was life here, but it was parallel life, not entangled. There was no obligation, only occasional, pleasant adjacency. On the table beside my saucer lay an envelope. It had arrived yesterday, forwarded by Robert Thorne's office. The return address was that of the Somerset Community Foundation, which was administering the Vance Legacy Scholarship Fund. I took a sip of tea. Then I opened the envelope. It was a letter from the selection committee chair, a Dr. Amina Jones. The language was formal, grateful. She informed me that the trust was fully funded and operational. The first round of applications had been reviewed. They had selected 4 recipients for the upcoming academic year. She provided their first names and intended fields of study: James, engineering; Lila, education; David, social work; Simone, biology. Attached were brief, anonymized profiles. I read the profiles. James worked nights at a warehouse to help his mother with rent. Lila volunteered at the same community center where I had donated my books. Their stories were not extraordinary in the sense of drama. They were ordinary stories of hard work and limited means. They were exactly what the fund was designed to address. I felt no surge of emotion. I felt verification. The mechanism I had set in motion with a phone call that dawn after my birthday was now a functioning reality. My estate was no longer a static pile of assets awaiting plunder. It was kinetic energy. It was tuition, books, a dorm room, a future. It was a door held open. I placed the letter back on the table. I looked at Charles's photograph. "It's done," I said quietly, to the room, to him. "It will do some good." The bitterness I had carried, the cold anger, had dissipated. It was not replaced by warmth, but by a neutral, steady calm. The revenge was not a lingering taste in my mouth. It was a concluded transaction. My children had attempted to convert my life into their convenience. I had converted it instead into potential for strangers. The math was balanced. I had heard nothing more from Cynthia or Marcus. Robert informed me the house sale closed without incident. The proceeds were transferred. He said Marcus had called his office once, making vague legal threats, but had not retained counsel. The silence was their final response. They had absorbed the shock and retreated into the lives they had made, which would now have to sustain them without the subsidy they had anticipated. I did not wonder if they were suffering. That was their business. My days had a new rhythm. I read. I attended a lecture series in the community room. I had coffee with Alma every Tuesday. I took the bus to the library to volunteer, as I always had, but the trip was shorter now. The simplicity was a relief. Every object in this apartment had a purpose I understood. There was no clutter of memory attached to ambivalence. I finished my tea. The morning was clear. I had no pressing tasks. I considered the letter again, not its words, but its concrete existence. It was proof that my final act had been constructive, not merely destructive. I had not just taken something away from Cynthia and Marcus. I had given something to James, Lila, David, and Simone. The giving was the point. The taking was merely the necessary clearance of a space in which to give. I stood and took my cup to the sink. I washed it, dried it, and put it away. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, at the blue sky beyond the rooftops. The view was not majestic, but it was unobstructed. There was no victory celebration, no moment of triumphant gloating. There was only this quiet apartment, this finished tea, this letter on the table, and the unimpeded light of a morning I had chosen for myself. The battle was over. The peace was mine. It was a plain peace, undecorated, and it was enough. I turned from the window. The day awaited. I had a book to read.